Chapter 4: First Contact.
The first drop was never supposed to be dramatic. That was the point. Orbital dominance had already been established. If it hadn't been, we wouldn't have been there. No banners, no speeches, no sense that history was about to pivot. Just a target, a plan, and enough force applied in exactly the right places to make resistance feel pointless. The species didn't call themselves anything we could pronounce. Our linguists gave them a designation drawn from their star's catalog number and the shape of their written language. It didn't matter. They were a regional power, technologically capable, strategically curious, and recently aggressive in a direction that brushed too close to Earth's interests. They had tested a border. This was the response. The dropship released us high and quiet, well outside their detection envelope. Atmospheric entry was shallow, controlled, designed to look like nothing more than background noise to sensors tuned for obvious threats. I remember the ground coming up fast. Not fast enough to feel rushed, just fast enough to demand attention. The suit handled the descent without complaint. Micro-adjustments fired along my legs and spine, trimming velocity, orienting my mass so I would hit exactly where planned. The moment my boots met the surface, the ground lost the argument. Dust and fragmented stone erupted outward, frozen in midair for a heartbeat before gravity reclaimed it. I took a knee automatically, systems stabilizing, sensors already mapping terrain. The HUD populated with data: elevation, wind shear, subsurface density, hostile movement vectors, and one steady green marker to my right. Rook, F.O. He landed lighter than I did, his suit bleeding off the last of its momentum with controlled grace. His head was already tilted skyward, antenna arrays extending from his helmet like something alive. Skies clear, for now. The terrain was wrong in subtle ways. Rock formations too regular, valleys shaped by something other than erosion. This world had been worked, reshaped over generations by hands that thought they owned it. We were here to correct that assumption. The enemy wasn't expecting a fight. They had installations scattered across the region, resource extraction, power generation, early warning arrays, all oriented outward, toward rival species, toward imagined threats, not toward us. I moved first, marking routes with quick, efficient gestures. The suit responded instantly, deploying anchor spikes, hard light barricades, shaping the battlefield before a shot was fired. Control came before contact. Enemy patrols reacted slowly when they finally noticed us. Their biology favored speed over durability, lean frames moving in erratic bursts. Energy weapons flared, bright, unfocused, cutting into rock and air more often than armor. I let them advance. Then I closed the ground under their feet. Fabrication charges detonated in sequence, collapsing pathways, forcing them into narrow corridors they hadn't planned to fight in. Panic followed confusion with predictable efficiency. Windows opening. Coordinates flowed across my HUD, clean and precise. He wasn't calling down destruction yet, just reminders. Orbital assets shifted. The sky noticed.
A single kinetic strike punched into a ridgeline miles away, not aimed at anything living, just enough to be seen, enough to be felt. The message was clear. We can reach you anywhere. The enemy broke contact within minutes. Their command structure collapsed even faster. That was the lesson. We didn't chase them, didn't pursue retreating forces, didn't press advantage beyond what doctrine required. We dismantled their infrastructure methodically, cutting power, isolating regions, making it painfully obvious that continued resistance would only cost them more. By the time we extracted, their leadership had already opened channels. Negotiations followed, agreements, alliances even. They learned. That was the best outcome. Back aboard the ship, no one celebrated. There was nothing to celebrate. The mission was assessed, cataloged, and archived, armor inspected, systems reset. Rook and I sat across from each other in silence in the dining areas aboard ship, faces unfamiliar even to ourselves after months of cryo. "That went clean," he said finally. "It was supposed to," I replied. He nodded. "They'll remember it. They should." That was when I understood something fundamental. This wasn't about winning battles. It was about shaping the future quietly, one decision at a time, from places no one ever thought to look. And this was only the beginning.
Chapter 7. The Shape of Forever. After the second extinction, the work settled into a rhythm. Not a comfortable one, not a gentle one, but a rhythm all the same. Predictable in its unpredictability, familiar in its demands. Campaigns blurred together not because they were alike, but because the process never changed. Tasking arrived. Transit followed. Sleep erased the distance. Waking brought war. Between those points, everything else was detail. Sometimes the enemy learned quickly. Sometimes they resisted until there was nothing left to resist with. Sometimes we arrived just in time. Sometimes we arrived too late and had to decide what, if anything, could still be saved. We stopped counting campaigns in numbers. We remembered them by terrain, by gravity, by color. The red dust world where storms peeled armor plating like skin. The ocean moon where combat happened entirely beneath the surface, pressure screaming against the suit until even reinforced joints protested. The jungle planet where nothing stayed dead long enough to confirm it. Different species, different mistakes, the same outcome. Cryosleep spread the years thin. The ship became the constant, steel corridors that never aged, systems that renewed themselves faster than memory could. Each waking felt like returning to a place that had been paused rather than left. We were not resupplied from Earth, not with people, not with ideas. By the time anything could arrive, we would already have learned the lesson it was meant to teach. The expeditionary forces were launched complete, over-strength, over-provisioned, and independent by design. What we became after that was shaped by necessity, not instruction. Earth receded further into abstraction. Centuries passed there while we slept. Governments rose and fell. Languages shifted. Borders moved, disappeared, reappeared under new names. The idea of home became less about geography and more about a distant black-and-white memory from before. Earth was behind us, just distant communications. The Force was around us. That was enough. Rook and I changed slowly. Not physically, the medical system saw to that, but in ways harder to quantify. Reactions sharpened, patience deepened, fear simplified. You learned exactly what you were afraid of and discarded the rest. You stopped imagining futures that didn't involve the next drop. That wasn't despair, it was clarity. New Marines entered the Force over time, drawn from deep cryo reserves and trained into doctrine that had already been written in blood. To us, they were new, unscarred, full of sharp edges and untested certainty. We trained them, not gently, not cruelly, precisely. They learned quickly that the expeditionary forces weren't a stepping stone. There was no after to plan for. You didn't count deployments, you counted survivals. Those who couldn't adapt didn't last. Those who did became part of something that felt permanent. Stories accumulated. Not officially. Officially, everything was data, telemetry, mission logs archived in systems designed to outlast any one civilization. Unofficially, Marines talked.
About drops that went wrong and still succeeded. About armor that should have failed and didn't. About HALE and ROOK shaping battles in ways that became case studies, then doctrine, then expectation. We didn't encourage it. We didn't deny it either.
Myth happens whether you want it to or not, when enough people watch you survive what should have killed you. There were moments, rare ones, when the thought surfaced uninvited. How long could this continue? The answer was always the same: as long as it needs to, as long as Earth exists, as long as someone, somewhere, decides to reach too far and take something they shouldn't. Forever felt real out there, not because it was promised, but because nothing suggested an end. The ships endured, the armor endured, the force adapted, rebuilt, refined itself after every conflict. We were old Earth's ocean-going armadas, lifted off the water and set loose among the stars. Independent, self-sustaining, gone so long that return became a legend rather than an expectation. The sea never loved sailors. Space didn't even notice us. And yet, in the quiet between campaigns, during the long waits before cryo, I sometimes caught myself watching the HUD reflect faintly off my visor, the green glow steady and unchanged. HALE, still there, unaltered. It occurred to me then that permanence wasn't immortality, it was relevance. As long as the Force needed us, we would exist. The idea was comforting, which should have been a warning.
Chapter 9. Quiet Replacements.
We noticed them before anyone mentioned them, not because they were loud or impressive, but because they moved differently. The tasking looked routine, another hostile system, another species that had decided the universe was smaller than it actually was. The expeditionary force aligned, prepared, and woke for the drop like it always had. Except this time, we weren't alone. The new unit staged alongside us in high orbit, their vessels clean-lined and unfamiliar. Smaller profiles, different thermal signatures, systems that spoke in tighter bursts, more compressed data packets that slid into our comms net without friction. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. Their designation tags populated briefly at the edge of my HUD, then faded, not because they were gone, but because the system deprioritized them automatically. They weren't assigned to us. They were assigned instead. Rook noticed it at the same time I did. "You see in this?" he asked. "Yes." The new armor was slimmer, still heavy, still lethal, but the proportions were different. Less brute reinforcement along the legs, more emphasis on distributed systems, drone integration, autonomous subroutines running parallel to the marine inside. They weren't weaker, they were efficient. We watched their telemetry scroll past as we remained in reserve. Their insertion vectors were tighter, risk tolerances narrower, timing synchronized to margins we would have considered unnecessarily precise in earlier years. "They're trusting the systems more," Rook said. "They have the luxury," I replied. The engagement unfolded fast, too fast. The new unit didn't shape the battlefield the way we would have. They didn't collapse terrain or force the enemy into deliberate kill zones. Instead, they flooded the battle space with sensors, drones, and micro-adjustments that denied the enemy options rather than space. It worked. Cleanly, efficiently, quietly. The enemy resistance collapsed without ever coalescing into something we could recognize as a fight. Command nodes blinked out, units surrendered or scattered before contact was made. No dramatic moments, no friction. The lesson wasn't taught, it was skipped. We were never called down, the recall came instead. Stand down, remain in reserve, mission complete. Back aboard our ship, the debrief was brief to the point of insult. No criticism, no praise, just acknowledgement. The new force had performed within expected parameters. Expected. Rook sat across from me afterward, helmet resting on the deck between his boots. He was quiet longer than usual. "They didn't need us," he said finally.
No, I agreed. They didn't. That wasn't the same as saying they were better, but it was close enough to matter. The data reviews told the rest of the story. Their armor required less maintenance. Their supply chains were lighter. Their casualty projections were lower, not because they fought harder, but because they exposed themselves less. Doctrine had shifted. Not dramatically, not disrespectfully, just enough. They were built for a universe that had already been shaped by the kind of work we'd spent our lives doing. They didn't need to force enemies into mistakes. Most of the time, the mistakes were already baked in. Earth had been watching, learning, iterating. We weren't obsolete yet, but we were no longer the sharpest edge. That realization didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It felt distant, like watching your wake spread across water long after the ship has passed. Proof that you were there, proof that something moved because you did. Orders came later, not urgent, not alarming. A reassignment, a different posture, less direct action, more oversight, more reserve status. A word began appearing in briefings that hadn't been there before. Legacy. Rook caught it too. "They're getting ready," he said. "For what?" I asked, though I already knew. "For us to stop." I looked at the HUD reflection in my visor. The name stenciled there hadn't changed in thousands of years. HALE. Still functional, still lethal, still necessary. Just not forever. And for the first time since I'd signed my name and left Earth behind, the idea of an ending stopped being theoretical.
Chapter 8. Fault Lines. The drop was late. Not delayed, late. The kind of late that doesn't trip alarms but makes experienced Marines pay attention. Schedules in the Expeditionary forces were conservative by design. If something slipped, it meant someone, somewhere, had made a calculation they didn't like the look of. We didn't ask why. We adjusted. The target world was heavier than projected. Gravity ran just high enough to tax armor systems tuned for efficiency rather than brute compensation. Not dangerous, not comfortable. The kind of planet that punished mistakes slowly. The enemy here was organized, disciplined, and cautious. Not innovators, but excellent imitators. They had learned from others' deaths and adapted accordingly. Their ground forces were dug in deep, layered, overlapping fields of fire mapped into terrain that had been reshaped over decades. They expected a fight. They just didn't expect us. We dropped outside their perimeter, landing in fractured highlands that broke up sensor coverage and interfered with long-range targeting. The ground cracked under my boots as I touched down, micro-fractures racing outward before the suit dampened the force. I stood, let the HUD stabilize, and took in the map. This wasn't a battlefield you rushed. This was one you unraveled. Rook landed 20 meters downslope. Lighter impact, already scanning sky and horizon. His tag settled into my vision. Rook, F.O. "Atmospherics are rough," he said. "They've tuned their sensors well." "Good," I replied. "Means they're paying attention." We advanced in measured bounds, shaping terrain as we went. Hard light barriers here, a collapsed ridgeline there. Every movement forced the enemy to react instead of plan. They responded intelligently, too intelligently. Their countermoves weren't panicked. They withdrew when pressured, reappeared along secondary routes, tested our edges with probing fire that withdrew before it could be fixed. This wasn't going to be quick. That was fine. I keyed a fabrication charge and watched a valley floor sink inward, turning an approach route into a dead end. Enemy units scrambled, repositioning under fire from our assault element. Rook's head tilted skyward. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. "No counter battery," he said. "Nothing left up there that can stop us." That settled it. I committed fully. Charges detonated in sequence, collapsing the terrain exactly where doctrine said it would hurt most. Enemy armor found itself trapped in elevation pockets it couldn't climb out of without exposing weak points. They fought hard for the ground. They lost it anyway. As the engagement stretched on, something became clear, not all at once, but in pieces. The enemy was reacting faster than expected, not tactically, strategically. Their repositioning assumed limitations that no longer applied, limitations we didn't have anymore. I felt it as a delay, a fraction of a second where my suit compensated a way it hadn't needed to before. Power draw spiked, then normalized. The HUD flagged it as acceptable variance and moved on. I didn't.
We won the engagement, cleanly, efficiently. The enemy withdrew in good order, preserving forces for a fight that would never materialize. Back aboard the ship, armor stripped down and systems cycling, I pulled the engagement data and reviewed it in silence. The suit had performed within spec. So had I. And yet, the margins were thinner. Not dangerously so, not yet, but thinner than they had been. Rook noticed me staring at the data longer than necessary. "You felt it too," he said. I nodded. "Nothing we couldn't handle," he added. "No," I agreed. "Nothing yet." That was the first time the idea surfaced uninvited. Not failure, not defeat, replacement. I dismissed it as fatigue and filed the report. The expeditionary forces had no room for nostalgia. But the thought lingered anyway, like a fault line you don't notice until the ground starts shifting under your feet.
The tasking didn't make sense at first. It was small, isolated, a minor flare on the edge of a system already written off as pacified. The new forces had moved on, their efficiency leaving behind nothing worth cataloging further. Nothing worth them. The coordinates came to us instead. A fractured moon, low mass, unstable crust, the kind of place that punished precision and rewarded experience. Enemy presence was minimal on paper, remnants, holdouts, something that had survived collapse by burrowing deeper instead of surrendering. The new units had flagged it as unnecessary risk. Too much variance, too little return. We were awake when the order arrived. Rook read it twice, then looked up at me. "They don't want to burn drones on it." "No," I said, "they don't." Because drones didn't understand ground that shifted under you. Algorithms didn't feel when gravity was lying. Autonomous systems didn't improvise when the map stopped agreeing with reality. We did. The drop was manual. No optimized insertion window, no tight margins, just controlled descent and trust in systems that had never failed us when it mattered. The moon's surface cracked under my boots like thin ice. The suit compensated instantly, redistributing load, but the ground kept moving, slow, deliberate slippage that threatened to open into something worse. "Subsurface is alive. Tectonics aren't settled." "They never are," I replied. Enemy contact came early and from below. They erupted from hidden apertures, armor fused into the rock itself, weapons tuned for ambush rather than engagement. Not many of them, but enough, and positioned perfectly to make automated approaches suicidal. This was their last card. It almost worked. I drove a charge into the ground and triggered it at half yield, collapsing a tunnel network without destabilizing the entire shelf. The timing was instinct, not calculation. The suit didn't argue. It trusted me the way it always had. Rook shifted position, calling down a single strike, not orbital firepower, but atmospheric pressure manipulation, forcing a collapse where gravity alone wouldn't. No counter-battery, nothing left up there that can stop us. The line landed the way it always did, not as reassurance, but as permission. We advanced slowly, deliberately, shaping the fight 1 meter at a time.
When the enemy tried to withdraw deeper, we denied them depth. When they tried to surface, we denied them space. They fought like something cornered. We fought like something patient. When it ended, there was nothing dramatic about it. No last stand, no moment worth recording separately. Just silence returning to a moon that had never deserved attention in the first place. Back aboard the ship, the assessment took longer than the mission. The analysts didn't argue the results. They couldn't. The new forces would have lost drones here, maybe people, or they would have walked away and left the problem dormant, waiting to flare again in a century. We ended it. The old way still worked. But that was the problem.
It was only needed when everything else failed. Rook sat beside me in the quiet afterward. "They'll log this," he said. "Yes." "They'll teach it." "Yes." "They won't send us next time." "No," I said, "they won't." That didn't feel like anger. It felt like completion. Orders followed within the next cycle. Not another tasking, a recall. For the first time in the Expeditionary Force's history, the language wasn't conditional. Not when able, not pending operational necessity. Return to Earth. Stand down. The message ended with something unfamiliar. Gratitude. I stared at it longer than I needed to. After thousands of years, countless drops, entire species reduced to history, this was the line that finally felt unreal. Rook let out a breath I hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Well," he said, "hell of a way to find out." I nodded. We had shaped battlefields, shaped futures, shaped a way of war so effective that it no longer needed us to exist. There was nothing left to prove. The ship began its turn toward a direction I hadn't faced in longer than memory could measure. Earth. And for the first time since I became HALE, the future wasn't something I could shape. It was something waiting for us.
The turn toward Earth took time. Not in the way time usually did for us, not something folded away by cryo and forgotten, but in long, measured stretches of wakefulness. There was no urgency now, no threat that demanded arrival at a specific moment. The galaxy would keep doing what it did, whether we were there or not. For the first time, we stayed awake longer than doctrine required. The ship felt different when it wasn't pointed toward a fight. Systems still hummed, the corridors still held their familiar weight and echo, but the intent was gone. No edge, no forward lean. We reviewed records we'd never had reason to look at before. Campaign summaries from Earth's perspective, cultural briefs spanning centuries at a time, languages evolving and collapsing into new forms faster than we could track them. Earth had changed itself while we were away. Not all at once, not dramatically, just steadily, the way planets do. Orders still came, not taskings, updates, preparations, instructions for reintegration that read like they'd been written by committees trying very hard not to offend ghosts. Our suits transmitted continuously now, full telemetry, emotional markers, cognitive states. Data streams that had once been purely operational were being archived with care. They were building something out of us. Rook noticed it before I did. "They've been watching everything," he said one cycle, scrolling through a data request that spanned more years than either of us had lived consciously. "They always were," I said. "No, this is different. They're curating." That was when it occurred to me that Earth didn't see us the way we saw ourselves. To them, we weren't a force. We were a story.
Chapter 12. Gods and Ghosts. We learned about the movies before we learned about the crowds. They existed in fragments at first,
references buried in cultural briefs, footnotes in educational material. Then full records surfaced, restored and preserved with obsessive fidelity. Three-dimensional reconstructions, audio pulled directly from suit feeds, environmental data rendered into experiences so complete that entire generations had lived pieces of our lives without ever leaving Earth. Fear, focus, victory, all recorded. They turned us into something, Rook said quietly. Something useful, I replied. Recruitment had surged across centuries. Children grew up knowing our names before they understood what war was. Civilians watched our drops the way ancient cultures once watched storms, with awe, fear, and distance. They called it propaganda. It didn't feel like a lie. It felt like translation. Earth had needed to understand what it was asking of the people it sent away forever. The cost, the discipline, the absence of choice once the choice was made. If our lives had done that, if our recorded footsteps across dead worlds had kept Earth cautious, unified, prepared, then it had been worth the privacy we never expected to have. Still, knowing you've been watched for thousands of years changes something inside you. You start to wonder where you ended and the myth began. Chapter 13. Civilian Gravity. Earth's gravity felt wrong. Not heavier, just insistent, like the planet was reminding us that it had always been there, waiting, whether we remembered it or not. The reception wasn't subtle. Ships lined orbit. Cities lit themselves in patterns meant to be seen from space. Names scrolled across continents in languages we barely recognized. HALE, ROOK. No ranks, no qualifiers, just names. The noise was overwhelming. Sound without purpose, emotion without discipline. Crowds pressed close, desperate to touch something they'd grown up watching from a safe distance. They called us heroes. They thanked us. They asked questions they didn't really want answers to. Civilian life was harder than any battlefield I'd ever shaped. There were no objectives here, no clean metrics for success, no HUD markers telling you where to stand or when to move. Conversations drifted, time stretched and compressed unpredictably. Rook handled it better than I did at first. He learned the rhythms faster, laughed when he was expected to, let silence exist without filling it with readiness. I watched him do it and followed when I could. We were given homes, positions, advisory roles that we declined politely and permanently. The war was over for us. We had done our part. The hardest part wasn't the attention. It was the stillness.
We aged the normal way after that. Slowly, irreversibly. Years passed, then decades. Our bodies finally caught up to the time we'd skipped over for so long. Strength faded, reflexes dulled. The armor stayed locked away, displayed in places of honor we rarely visited. Families grew around us. Children asked questions. Grandchildren asked better ones. We told stories when asked, not the ones from the digital feeds, those were already known, but the quiet parts, the waiting, the discipline, the way purpose feels when it's absolute, and how strange life becomes without it. They listened, fascinated and confused in equal measure. They couldn't relate. That was fine. Not everything is meant to be understood by everyone. On the last day I saw Rook, we sat outside as the sun went down, its light scattering across the sky the same way it always had. Some things never needed upgrading. "Do you miss it?" he asked. I thought about it. "Yes," I said, "and no." He smiled. Good answer. When he was gone, the world felt quieter than space ever had. I followed not long after. In the end, there was no grand conclusion, no final mission, just the knowledge that for a long time, longer than anyone had a right to expect, two men had gone where they were needed and done what had to be done. Earth endured. That was enough. And somewhere, generations later, people still watched the old recordings and wondered what it would have been like to live a life with that kind of clarity. They would never know, but the universe remembered, and so did we.
We hope you enjoyed the story. There's more to come. Subscribe down below. These stories are written by us, helped by AI, and then we put it all together and bring it to you. Stay tuned for the next story coming your way.